Where do we go from here? That is the question I want to ask you and anyone watching or listening to this podcast. My name is Nick. This is Not Suitable for Democracy. This is going to be a two-part episode, whereas the next installment coming out the following week. There is a lot going on right now in our country with the political climate. The temperature is rising faster than ever, and there seems to be more problems than solutions. But that's why I started this podcast, to educate, inform, and bring people into the political process so we can work together and make our country even stronger. I wanted to share, for those who haven't been following along and those who aren't familiar with my work, my name is Nick. I've been a political organizer in Astoria, New York for nearly 10 years. It's been a wonderful experience meeting all walks of life and all types of folks who just want to learn more, but also sometimes just want that sense of community. And, being openly gay, it's definitely given me a closer eye to the issues facing my community, but more so, what can we do here in New York City that then has an impact around the country? So LGBTQ plus issues, definitely passionate, near and dear to my heart. So maybe that's something you're interested in, maybe something you don't know much about. If we can at least start to have these conversations where we learn from one another, we can then be on the right track to make our country stronger together. Now, I know that sounds like some political fluff, but after the recent events of what's been happening in this country, we definitely need to cool it down. The temperature has been rising a lot faster than we ever expected, and that is all based on the recent events. Now, what I'm specifically talking about, what happened on September 10th, 2025, because here's the thing. In today's political climate, after those recent events, I can safely say that we are not safe. Now, I know that sounds really wild, but here's the thing. After the past week or so, it has become a fact that there are people in our country who are really looking to not bring us together, to not unite everyone from all walks of life, all states, all communities, rural, suburban, and city, right? There are people in this country who want us to be in a better place, that want us to come together, but we also know that when certain people divide and conquer, that is what keeps certain people in power. And that's what we're seeing play out right now. So first off, since what's happened since last week, what we do know is that we are in a tough spot, and this podcast is going to look to answer, where do we go from here? So first, we know that tensions are tough across, let's say, the political spectrum. And we know that people have different points of view, different experiences that shape those points of view, and essentially how that then informs someone to then go into the voting booth and cast a ballot for a preferred candidate. With that said, we know in November of 2024, the most recent election, the country voted for President Donald Trump to have a second term in the White House. Now, since then, since he was inaugurated in January 2025, things have definitely been changing. Personally, not for the best. But we also have metrics to prove that. And we can tell by one of his most recent policies with the tariffs, which we know the American consumers are paying for. With that said, it's definitely put a strain in our economy, right? We know that countries around the world are holding out on certain trade deals. And we know that the certain companies that need to then import certain products from around the world are then having to pay more because of the tariffs, which then has led to a hiring freeze. Less companies are hiring. We also know that they are, stretching very thin the supplies and other important items that they need in order to run their businesses successfully. And this is both at the large scale and smaller business scale. Now, the reason why I mention this is because this is the direct action of the current leadership, both between the House, the Senate, and the White House. This current administration is creating economic hardship, actually exacerbating the economic hardship that apparently swung the electorate from Democratic leadership to Republican leadership. We knew that in the 2020 to 2024 years, prices were soaring, inflation was up. On top of that, right, the country was trying to survive a worldwide pandemic. Now, I paint the picture of what's been happening in an economic sense because that's step one of what we have to understand of how we got here. Because there is economic anxiety in our country, everyone is faced with it in some way, shape, or form. Arguably, probably except the billionaires because they are very financially well off, so they will never experience the same level of hardship that the rest of us are facing. But with that said, we know that the oligarchy, the rich and powerful in this country, are on such a different level than the rest of us that they have more political power, more control financially and economically than we could ever experience or even imagine. And because of that, while working with the Trump administration, such as Elon Musk, who is unappointed, unelected, but somehow got to be the job at the head of DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, which, as we know, turns out was not very efficient. Instead of cutting billions in government spending, they wound up spending even more in the big, beautiful bill that was passed just this past year, and even more so, cutting life-saving programs, even hurting folks in rural America. For example, we know that rural America, thrives in agriculture, right? And USAID, one of the programs that was a part of our government, was actually sending soybeans to other parts of the world. Now, why am I mentioning this, right? The point being is that because the USAID was cut, right, one of the programs that we were paying billions of dollars to the farmers to export soybeans to other parts of the world where they needed soybeans, right? China actually was one of the big importers from our soybeans, right? We were subsidizing the profits of rural America's farmers. But because that program was cut, they're not getting paid, putting more financial strain on working class rural farmers in America. So right then and there, as much as people think, oh, USAID, we don't need that program, it's not efficient. Well, because this was done in such a sloppy, inefficient, just dense way, right? Without transparency, without visibility, and without even like a meticulous, methodology to really be precise about it, we now have more suffering, more hardship than we could have ever, that should have ever been happening in the first place. So not okay. But because there's economic hardship, that economic anxiety is fueling people's anger and distress. When we live in a heightened climate environment, let's say, heightened environment of more stress, more anxiety, right? That does not bode well for the American psyche or anyone's psyche, right? I mention that because we need to understand the economics between people not being able to find a job, especially Gen Z men. We know that young Gen Z men have a harder time finding a job in the workplace. They go to college, spend, tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, on a degree. They get to the workplace, they're trying to, get hired. No one will hire them. Again, in part because of the tariffs that is causing a lot of uneasiness with the business leaders in charge, and they're not looking to hire. So you can see how now the current administration, as much as they wanted to make things better, actually made things worse. We're seeing that. We're feeling it. The material impact of these changes are already creating the conditions for economic hardship and increase in anxiety. Now, I bring that up because if you can understand the hardship of it that's going to be fueling your everyday life from this economic anxiety, from these frustrations, from this anger, right? Where do people go from there? If they can't find a job, they can't provide for their family, they can't put food on the table, they can't pay their rent, or if they get sick, they can't afford their hospital bills, it's not good. We also know that in our country, we have several political ideologies, but two main parties. Democratic Party, people say is left-leaning. Republican Party, people say is right-leaning. Now, left and right, whatever you are, it is what it is. But what we can say is when we watch how these political parties operate, and even the movements that kind of back them, the grassroots movements that get pipelined into each party, right? From the Democratic side, I have more experience with the Democratic side, right? I used to be a very staunch, proud Democrat, but now I can safely say I am not. My political journey has enlightened me to really understand that there is a level of corruption and a level of resistance to change within the Democratic Party. I've been on the receiving end of that, and it has not been pleasant. And it's all documented. You can look it up on The Intercept. Thank you, Brian Grimm, for listening to me and letting me share my story. And basically, when the local Democratic Party right here in New York City did not want to embrace change. And this was in 2018 when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was first running for Congress. Lo and behold, she obviously won against Joe Crowley. I had spoken out in support of AOC because at the time I had a negative experience from Joe Crowley personally. But lo and behold, here we are. That's why I lean more progressive. Progressive politics is so important in today's political climate, but even more so what the movement is about, right? Like, I don't want to be the one who defines the progressive movement because I'm sure people have more input that I'm probably missing. But to keep it very tight, I believe in a very short-winded one-liner, the progressive movement is about getting the corruption of money out of politics. If we can get rid of the money, we can get rid of the corruption. It's obviously more complicated than that, totally acknowledge, but this is what will at least get our country in a better direction when our leadership is not corrupted by external powerful forces that are very selfish, but also very greedy. But when you think about it, when you expand the progressive movement, it's also about, Bernie said it best. Bernie Sanders, when he ran in 2020, hashtag not me, us. That if we are willing, that we should all be willing to fight for anyone else in America, strangers, right? People you don't know. Because we know deep down the values of the progressive movement can transform policy that helps everyone in this country. I'm willing to fight for those people because I know my values are that strong around healthcare. We deserve universal healthcare, so no human being should be left dying in this country, especially just because they can't afford their hospital bills, which are very overly priced and unfairly priced, right? No one should have to die because they can't afford their bills. I believe that. And that's one of the values of the progressive movement. So I'm willing to fight for anyone. Even if they disagree with me, I am still going to fight for their right for universal healthcare. Right? And you can just take that kind of line of thinking across so many other policies, right? On the other side, I have zero experience with the Republican Party because I never want to be a Republican, nor will I ever vote for a Republican, because from what I've gathered, right, I can't say this is firsthand experience, but what I have gathered, to me, the way the party comes across and has treated me as a citizen, as an American, as a voter, right? My rights don't matter to them. They don't. Point blank. How did I get married? Not thanks to the Republican Party, right? So what I can understand is that while the progressive movement in the grassroots side of things is looking to fight for values that bring everyone into the fold, right? Everyone has the right to vote. Everyone should have universal health care. Everyone should have access to education, right? These are things that are inclusive, where we support diversity and we want everyone to have a dignified life. The conservative side, that has not been the message that I've ever received, because when you hear about the policies and you hear about the messaging, their movement is exclusionary. Their values are different. See, they will fight hard for the people they love and support, but we know those are only specific people, right? They are tough on crime, the party of law and order. They will protect their loved ones, but in doing so, use very charged rhetoric, use very fear-based messaging. And these are things that are indicative of so many problems with our systems and with our exclusionary policies, right? The fact that our country used to be segregated, right? Separate but equal even, right? The Jim Crow era, even going farther back where worse atrocities were happening. The Republican Party hasn't evolved out of that yet, where they are still under the idea, speaking from my personal experience, that, same-sex marriage should be banned or that it should be overturned in their eyes. I don't believe that, right? I think that, and here's the thing, right? The Republican Party has not made it their mission to make marriage available to everyone. They've made it their mission to make it available only to those who believe in Christianity, which the way they define it in the Bible is that it's only between a man and a woman. So I believe, that people should have the right to get married because the way this country has designed marriage in a legal sense is that there are over 1,000 rights that now my husband and I are guaranteed because we got married. For instance, if there was ever a Christian funded hospital and if something ever bad happened where one of us had to be in a hospital, and that was apparently the closest one, the Christian funded hospital, based on policy of the hospital, they would originally have the right to deny my husband and I from seeing each other on their deathbed. So if one of us was going to be dying, that hospital would have the right to say, nope, even when the person is dying, you cannot visit them. You cannot be there for their last breath. You are not worthy enough to share the last moments with the person you love. That's exactly what was going on before same-sex marriage became law of the land in 2015 at the Supreme Court level. That's what was going on. So I know conservatives may be upset where it's like, oh, we would never believe that. But that's literally what was happening. That's literally what was happening every day in America to same-sex couples, especially those who didn't have the right yet. And remember, this is going through the AIDS crisis. This is going through all of the homophobia that was going on in the 90s, well into the 2000s. All of the bans that were happening at the state level with same-sex marriage, right? So from my experience in this country, the Republican Party has never been good to me. I can definitely say that firsthand. Sure, there may be a policy here or there that like has been good, right? Like out of the 100, let's say there's 100, there's always like one. So it'd be like 99% of the time they haven't been good to me, right? But it's not worth it. I'm not going to support a party that doesn't think I deserve rights. That doesn't think that I'm not human. That doesn't think that I am worthy. And that's based on the facts. It is a fact that so many Republican leaders want to exclude other people from rights. It is a fact that Republican leaders want to incite violence. That is a fact. We hear it in their rhetoric. We hear it in their messaging. It is a fact that so many Republican leaders at the grassroots level, at the House, the Senate, even in the White House, there is no push for toning down rhetoric, for unity, for working across the aisle, or even just trying to instill those neighborly values that this country once had. Now, granted, it's not like the polarization of social media has helped, right? The proliferation of content in the age of information overload, right? Where people are consuming so much information at such a fast rate. Like even now with AI, we don't know if there's content out there that's being posed as news, but it's not really, it's fake news, right? But now people are calling things they don't like fake news, even if it's actually true. So the fact that there's so much disconnect between the two basic movements in this country, right? Progressives looking to fight for everyone and conservatives looking to fight for only the people they want to protect. Where do we go from here? When it comes to facts, right? Not everyone even agrees on what's true and what's not true. So how do we combat that, right? How do we come together around some common principles like the sky is blue and Santa Claus is not real? Spoiler alert, he's not. So like, how does that work? It's not easy, and it definitely doesn't put us on a good path if we ever want to come together and unite and just love one another, right? Or, like I mentioned before, progressive movement, welcome y'all. We would like to fight for everyone and support their right to a dignified life in America. That's what I believe. So I would love to see more of that come around. So with everything going on, this was a wake-up call. Definitely a wake-up call for all of us to really consider who is in our network, who can we trust, who in our circles are supportive, they're operating from a place of kindness or at least understanding and empathy. And these are sometimes things that we have to work on. I'll be honest, I wish I was even more empathetic sometimes. I realize that that's something that has to be learned. It's something that is not always easy for people to put themselves in someone else's shoes. Not literally, but the idea of really understanding. And we have to be open to that, right? Like, I need to be open to conservatives and how they feel about things going on. We all need to do a better job. But that's not what's happening right now. We are seeing one side going about their everyday, doing the best we can, trying to put our best foot forward, but also just living our lives. Well, the other side is essentially blaming that other side for the events that happened, which is not reasonable or fair, right? Sometimes there's not even evidence. Sometimes these call outs are based on feeling, not fact, right? People are in a really heightened emotional state, so they're reacting off that. And speaking of empathy, right? Like, I can understand how someone can be upset over news, and we need to give them grace. I know that sounds wild, but that's how we become better Americans, better people. But then I don't understand why conservatives are now doxing people. They're now going online, and with anyone who disagrees with how they feel about certain things, they are now putting their information online. There's been over 20,000 submissions of people, probably on the left, who feel a certain type of way. And that was all done by people on the right, the conservative movement. Now, if like a socialist ever did that, they'd be freaking out. But the fact that conservatives are doing this, where's the empathy to be like, hey, you know what? I don't like it if someone did that to me. Maybe I shouldn't do it. You know what? I disagree with how they feel, so I think I'm just going to have my own, start your own podcast, right? Post whatever you want on your personal Facebook or your Instagram, your TikTok, fine, do what you got to do. But don't dox them. Because if you're saying that, well, you don't agree with me, so you don't deserve a job that provides money, security, stability, and for some people, healthcare benefits, right? How is that any different than the events that happened? If we can all agree that no one should be harmed over their point of view, that looks like harm over someone's point of view. So I don't support that. But it looks like that a whole movement of people do. And it's not stopping from Republican leaders. It's not stopping from Republican rhetoric. It's not stopping from grassroots movements, right? People on the other side who are even more radicalized. And I realize me even saying this puts a target on my back. But I've always had a target on my back in this country. I've just been fortunate to just be living this long. So it's that balance, right? We can speak our minds and come from a place of good, but just my sheer existence threatens so many people on the other side that I could be the gayest Mother Teresa out there, but at the end of the day, because I'm still not drinking their Kool-Aid, they want me out. And that's just a fact. You could ask so many people. They might not post it online, but they're having that conversation in the locker room. They're having that conversation when they're out hunting. They're having that conversation when they're at the boys' club. They're having that conversation behind closed doors. They're having that conversation on the football field, soccer field, you name it field. Those conversations are happening. Even worse, Truth Social, right? The private DMs, the far corners of the internet and the darkest realms. Those conversations are happening. I want to share a quick anecdote, which is why I say that it's happening. back in January of 2025, just weeks before President Donald Trump was inaugurated, ProPublica published a piece from an openly gay man in Utah who went undercover as a mole to investigate the Oath Keepers. This is verified, this is fact, and this actually happened. This guy basically went undercover for like years because he had his own troubled childhood growing up as gay in a conservative family out in Utah. He wanted to become a survival trainer, meaning someone who went out into the woods and just survived off nature for like days or weeks at a time, which is brave, right? And the whole key here, what I'm referencing, is while he might have done that, that's how a lot of young conservative men, how they operate. Primal instinct. Because empathy, like I said, it's a skill that's developed that takes time to really understand. But we know when people say they don't believe in empathy, it's like, it's not a belief. It's a skill set. These are skills that help us become better human beings when we really get to listen and learn from each other. But if you're not willing to listen and learn, well, then that's part of the problem. So he went undercover and learned and shared it all, right? And the fact that now he's been on the run for his life because we don't know if he's alive or not. Because that was the threat. That was the risk he took. He's like, I might not be able to live if I do this because those people are that violent. It's documented, it's true, it's out there, it's verified information. Some takeaways, right? People in those groups, they're friends with attorneys general around the country, state attorneys general. They're friends with members of Congress. They're friends with people in government and administrations. They're friends with local leaders, law enforcement, churchgoers, you name it. So the fact that this way of thinking seeps into certain people, and then those certain people are connected to our government, to our institutions, to our agencies, or to groups that are supposed to protect and serve the American people. That is why when I said it is safe to say we're unsafe, that is why. We cannot trust the people who are supposed to protect us because we have people who are consolidating their power. As scary as that is exactly what's happening. I'm not afraid to say it because it needs to be said. People are consolidating power to build the vision that they want to see in the world. And what scares me is that we all know not everyone is included in that vision. They can tell you as much as they want till they're blue in the face, but that's why they don't vote blue, right? Because they do not want everyone in their vision of the world. These are facts. So what can we do? In the next installment, I'm going to go through ways that you can protect yourself, that you can rise above. Seeing how where we are today, it's not going to be easy. But if we start having these conversations, friends, family, neighbors, coworkers, whoever, well, maybe not coworkers because place of work gets a little tricky, right? But if you have these conversations with people you trust, you'll start to learn, you start to listen, and just maybe, right, you can start planting the seeds. And that's how we start to come together, because you can be strong in your values, but you can be stronger as a human being to try to connect with someone so we can all be safe and feel valued to live our lives. That's what I would love most from all of us. So if you like what you heard and want to learn more, make sure to subscribe to Not Suitable for Democracy. You can tune in on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Or follow along and connect on Instagram at NSFD_pod. Thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, Democracy is not suitable without you.